Biography of the Buddha for children. The Birthplace. There used to be a small kingdom called Kapilavastu at the foot of the Himalaya mountains in northern India about 2,600 years ago. The Sakya clan, who had the family name Gotama, lived there peacefully as farmers. King Suddhodana and Queen Maya ruled the kingdom of Kapilavastu, and they were respected for their wisdom and generosity. But they were worried because they had no child to succeed to the crown, even after 20 years.
The Birth of a Prince. One night, Queen Maya had a mysterious dream. A huge and shining white elephant entered into her side. After the dream, Queen Maya became pregnant, and her wish to have a baby came true. On her way to her parents' home for the birth, she stopped to rest in the beautiful Lumbini Park. There were many flowers in full bloom. The moment she reached out her right hand to touch a beautiful flower, she felt a serious pain, and then a prince was born. The prince walked 7 steps in the 4 directions, east, south, west, and north. And he pointed toward the sky with his right hand and toward the ground with his left hand. After that, the prince cried out,
"Of all creatures in the universe, only humans can be enlightened."
It signified humans' value. The day was the 8th day of April by the lunar calendar. Flower petals fell from the sky, and a lotus grew at his every step. King Suddhodana named him Siddhartha, which means a prince fulfilled all wishes. Prediction of Asita. At that time, there lived a sage named Asita in the Himalaya mountains. He heard the news that the prince was born and visited the kingdom of Kapilavastu. After looking at the prince, he tearfully predicted,
"The prince will leave home and become a Buddha to save all the people in the world from suffering."
The king asked him why he was crying.
"It's because I'm too old to listen to Buddha's teaching in the future."
The king was pleased with these words at first, but he started to worry because he wanted the prince to grow up and be the leader of Kapilavastu.
Death of the Queen. Seven days after Queen Maya had given birth to the healthy baby boy, she died. King Suddhodana felt sorrow, even while holding the prince in his arms. According to Indian custom, her younger sister, Mahapajapati, became the queen and cared for Siddhartha with all her heart. Prince Siddhartha grew up to become a healthy boy.
Agonies of the Prince. When Siddhartha was a young boy, he was very bright and imaginative. When he was 12 years old, one spring day he went into the field with his father to watch a farmer working. Siddhartha noticed a bird that came down from the sky and quickly carried off the worms turned up by the plowing. He was very shocked at this sight.
Why do living creatures harm each other?
He thought.
Marriage. When Siddhartha was 19, King Suddhodana arranged the marriage of the prince to the princess Yasodhara. She was very wise as well as beautiful. The king built the prince and princess a luxury palace. However, Siddhartha did nothing but contemplate. When he thought of the bird he had seen eating worms, he thought, "Humans are also born and will die someday. Is there no way to be free from death?"
Four signs. Siddhartha was kept inside the palace, so one day he asked the king to let him go outside the palace wall. Siddhartha saw a wrinkled, bent old man outside the east gate, and he saw a man suffering from disease outside the south gate, and a dead man carried on a stretcher outside the west gate. Outside the north gate, he encountered a monk. He wore a ragged robe, but he looked very peaceful.
"You look content. How can you be so tranquil?"
Asked the prince.
"Everyone is born, gets sick, ages, and dies. I just practice to escape this kind of suffering,"
answered the monk. Siddhartha felt inspired by the monk and decided to leave his family.
The birth of Rahula. At the same time, Princess Yasodhara gave birth to a good-looking boy. Siddhartha heard of the birth of his son and sighed. "Alas, Rahula is born." Rahula means obstacle or fetter. Siddhartha wanted to become a monk as soon as possible, but he was afraid that the baby would interfere with his plan. The king and the princess were very disappointed with Siddhartha's desire to become a monk.
A feast. After Rahula's birth, King Suddhodana was worried whenever he saw Siddhartha contemplating. So the king ordered,
I'm going to have a party for Prince Siddhartha. Invite the best musicians and dancers and prepare the table.
That day, the palace was full of music and dancers' laughter. But Siddhartha didn't enjoy himself watching the dancing girls. Instead, he went on thinking of the way to free humans from aging, sickness, and death.
Resolution. After finishing the big celebration, everyone had fallen deeply asleep. But Prince Siddhartha could not sleep, so he headed for the garden, where he found that the fatigued dancing girls had fallen asleep here and there. The prince was very surprised to see how the girl's beauty could be transformed into terrible ugliness in one night. It was indeed one of the most upsetting things that had ever happened to the prince. I cannot hesitate any more. I must leave the palace to search for real happiness and ultimately become free from birth and death.
Make an absolute vow. While everyone in the palace slept, Siddhartha went into the room where Yasodhara and their newborn boy Rahula slept. He was filled with loving kindness towards them and promised himself that he would come back to see them after he found the ultimate truth, vowing,
I will never come back to this palace until I resolve the problems of birth and death.
going forth. Prince Siddhartha awakened his charioteer, Chandaka, to leave the palace while everyone was still asleep.
Chandaka, it's me. Get up, quickly.
What, Prince, at this time?
Be quiet, please, and get my horse ready. I'll leave the palace tonight.
Chandaka got the horse, the snow-white Kantaka. Prince Siddhartha left the palace without waking anyone. In the silence of the night, there were only shining stars in the sky.
Mendicant Gautama. Riding his horse, they crossed the border of Kapilavastu by dawn. Arriving at a river, Prince Siddhartha dismounted, washed his face, then cut off his long hair. He had taken off the precious crown and now handed it to Chandaka, resolutely ordering him to take it and Kantaka back to Kapilavastu. Prince Siddhartha then met a hunter who was going through the forest. He gave his expensive clothes to the hunter and put on the hunter's shabby clothes. So, at the age of 29, Siddhartha began the homeless life of a mendicant.
Practicing austerities. As a mendicant, he sat in the lotus position under a big tree for several days. But it was not easy to attain enlightenment, even if a lot of time had passed. Therefore, he went to visit hermits to learn their methods of attainment. But after practicing with them for a time, he became convinced that they would not lead him to enlightenment. So, he decided to give up finding a teacher.
No one, no place, nobody can teach me and lead me to enlightenment. Nothing except myself. From now on, I have to develop by myself and attain enlightenment.
King Bimbisara. Looking for a good place to practice, Gautama went up the mountain of Rajagraha in the capital of Magadha. The king of this country was named Bimbisara. On seeing Gautama, the king realized he was the prince of Kapilavastu, the successor to the throne, who had given up everything and become a mendicant in search of the means to liberate all beings from suffering by old age, sickness, and death.
I recognized you immediately. You were the prince of Kapilavastu. You left your country and you're already here? How about helping me in this country and enjoying a comfortable life with me?
But Gautama graciously refused the king's suggestion, and he continued meditating. After seeing Gautama's concentrated practicing, King Bimbisara said,
Oh, you absolutely will attain the perfect enlightenment. At that time, could you teach me of your enlightenment?
Gautama nodded his agreement to the king's request.
Asceticism.
In the beginning, Gautama practiced alone, but soon he had companions. He stayed in the forest of Uruvilla with 5 mendicants. Gautama practiced a wide variety of special forms of asceticism, and then began to gradually reduce his food until finally he arrived at the point where he was eating nothing at all. 1 month, 2 months, time passed. He became so thin that his whole bony frame was clearly visible. Yet this hard practice did not discourage him one bit. But he still could not attain enlightenment.
Sujata offering. One day, while meditating alone, Gautama fainted and fell down because of exhaustion. A girl named Sujata fed him some delicious rice porridge. Soon, he regained consciousness and began to feel better. He realized that without the girl's help, he would have died before attaining enlightenment. From then on, Gautama began eating normally. Soon, his health was completely restored. It was clear to him now that asceticism was not the way to enlightenment. Having sat down under a Bodhi tree, Gautama made a vow to himself.
Even if my blood dries up and my muscles shrink, leaving only skin and bones, I'll not leave this seat until I finally and absolutely achieve the goal of finding, for myself and all beings, a way of deliverance from suffering, of the turning round of life and death. Mara's temptations. While Siddhartha sat under the large Bodhi tree, the Mara Papamant, a demon, tried everything he could to distract him. He even sent his 3 beautiful daughters, enticing Gautama to linger on the pleasures of the past, and arousing his desire to return to the royal palace and enjoy the sensual life of former days.
How could you resist? Then I'll surprise you again with thunder and lightning.
The angry Mara Papamant attacked to disturb Gautama's mind with thunder and lightning. But because of his resolute vow, Gautama resisted these temptations with forceful mental effort. Finally, he succeeded in completely dispersing all the illusory thoughts that were disturbing him. His mind became calm and tranquil like a pond of still water. enlightenment. After Gautama had resisted the demon's temptation, his mind cleared up like a calm lake. At last, 7 days after he started meditating, Gautama looked at a rising star, and feeling joy from escaping from all the suffering that he hadn't been able to put behind him, he attained enlightenment. Gautama was 35 years old, and the date was December 8th. After that, people called him Sakyamuni, which means the great saint of the Sakya clan.
The first Dharma talk. After the Buddha attained enlightenment, he didn't leave his seat for a week. He just enjoyed the feeling of the truth. But he had one worry.
This truth that I have seen is so deep and difficult. If I try to teach it to the people, what will they be able to understand? What shall I do?
At the time the Buddha was worrying and hesitated, Deva, a king of heaven, came down to him, saying,
O Buddha, please teach the truth for all beings.
Deva asked this to the Buddha 3 times, very sincerely. The Buddha decided to spread the truth for the people. The Buddha went to Magadha to teach the 5 practitioners, the companions who had practiced with him, and he taught the Dharma for the first time.
The teachings. The Buddha taught the 5 practitioners as follows. You have to go the right way, which is not one-sided towards suffering or pleasure. The Buddha also taught the 4 Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, which is the way to a calm mind, free from all suffering. The 5 practitioners were very delighted with the Buddha's teaching, so they decided to become his disciples. These 5 practitioners were the first bhikkhus who trusted and followed the Buddha.
The Buddha's disciples. At the time when the 5 practitioners learned about the teaching, One rich young man in Varanasi had fallen victim to suffering terribly due to the many worries of life. But the Buddha's teaching enabled him to solve his problems, and finally he became a bhikkhu. When he had become a bhikkhu, his parents and wife became the first lay Buddhists, and his 54 friends embraced Buddhism and then became arahants. Propagation. When the number of the disciples who had attained enlightenment reached 60, the Buddha said the following:
O bhikkhus, go and spread this teaching to many places for the happiness and the comfort of all beings in the world. Don't go together with two persons in the same village. Teach the Dharma, which is excellent in the beginning, excellent in the middle, and excellent in the end. Live the ever-clean life. If a person who has a truly clean mind hears the teaching, he must attain enlightenment.
Dharma talk about fire. After the Buddha sent his disciples all over the country, he decided to return to Magadha. On the way, he stayed at a house one night in the village of Uruvilla, whose people worshipped fire. There were 3 brothers there named Kasyapa. They tested the Buddha's capabilities.
Let's prepare a bed at the ancestral shrine where a poisonous snake lives. Even the Buddha can't get away from a poisonous snake.
The next day, the Kasyapa brothers expectantly opened the door of the shrine. And yet, what was going on? The Buddha sat safely with his legs crossed. After that, the Kasyapa brothers embraced Buddhism with 1,000 of their disciples. The Buddha said thus:
Our mind is burning with greed, anger, and foolishness. It is wrong to worship fire outside of ourselves without seeing the fire in the mind. To live free from all suffering, we first of all have to extinguish the fire of greed, anger, and foolishness. The earliest monastery. Upon arriving at Rajagraha, the Buddha preached in various ways to allow King Bimbisara and his people to understand his teachings to fulfill the promise he made when he began the mendicant life. King Bimbisara gave the Buddha Venuvana, a park in a bamboo grove, where they could build a residence for the bhikkhus. One rich person, who had decided to take refuge in the Buddha after seeing his practice, then offered to build a small monastery to keep them out of the rain. Hence, Venuvana became the earliest monastery in the history of Buddhism.
Visit to hometown. On hearing that his father was eager to see his enlightened son, the Buddha went to Kapilavastu with his disciples. They stayed outside the city and went begging for food. The Buddha preached for his father, his relatives, and all the people in the country. His stepbrother Nanda was converted along with his cousins Ananda and Devadatta. Prince Rahula, his 7-year-old son, became the first Sramana under the guidance of Sariputta. The Buddha demonstrated his message of equality by accepting as his disciple Upali, who was a barber and in the lowest class.
The first woman's renunciation. Many years after his second visit to his hometown, the Buddha rushed back again on hearing that his father was seriously ill. He taught his father about death. King Suddhodana passed away in peace. The widowed Mahapajapati wanted to renounce her old life and join the Sangha, but was refused 3 times. Eventually, she got permission with the aid of Ananda's pleading to the Buddha, and she became the first bhikkhuni.
Revolt of Devadatta. Devadatta requested that the Buddha resign and appoint him as the head of the Sangha, but the Buddha refused. Devadatta was very disappointed and planned to kill the Buddha. While the Buddha was on his way to a mountain called Vulture Peak, Devadatta pushed a huge stone down the hillside, but the rock suddenly broke into small pieces. His second attempt was to set loose a wild elephant. It rushed at the Buddha, but then it knelt down and became calm.
Death of beloved disciples. The Buddha worked hard teaching and spreading the Dharma for 45 years. He was now 80 years old. His body was getting weaker and he felt tired. The news that Sariputta and Moggallana passed away made him very sad and hurt. He told the disciples, "Everything's impermanent. Rely upon yourself. Do not depend upon anyone else. Make my teachings your light. Do not depend upon any other teachings."
Prediction. Buddha stayed in Baluva in Vaisali during the rainy season. He fell ill due to the severely hot weather. He predicted,
Listen well, Ananda. I will enter nirvana in 3 months.
Hearing this, Ananda was shocked and filled with sorrow.
Last meal. When the Buddha reached Pava, he was ill from some food offered by Chunda, a blacksmith. In spite of the great pain, he continued his journey. He asked Ananda to prepare a place for him to lie down in Kusinagara. Ananda made a bed between 2 big sala trees. The Buddha told Ananda, I will attain parinirvana tonight.
Last disciple. At that time, there was a wandering ascetic named Subhadda. He heard that the Buddha was in town and was soon to attain parinirvana. He visited the Buddha to clear his doubts. On hearing the Buddha's Dharma, he attained enlightenment. Thus, Subhadda became the last disciple to be directly ordained by the Buddha.
Last sermon and parinirvana. Finally, the Buddha said to his disciples, You should respect each other, follow my teachings, and refrain from disputes. Strive on with mindfulness and share the bliss of truth. Depend on my teachings and attain enlightenment through diligence. Then he entered Samadhi. It was on a full moon day in February by the lunar calendar that the greatest teacher of all time passed away. His teachings are a guiding light to the world like a torch in the dark.